So now we'll study the concept of sustainable development. The sustainable development has become the major concern of the economists and the policymakers for the last few decades, starting from the last quarter of 20th century. So if we want to discuss about sustainable developments, first we have to consider some facts. So what are the facts? First is, if you see the path of progress of the modern advanced economies like USA, Canada, European Union countries. So in their due process of economic development, they use the high technology to extract the natural resources, and in this way of industrialization, the byproduct of industrialization is the increase in the environmental pollutants in the nature. So now if we consider what should be the choice of the LDCs regarding its the path of progress, we see that there always arises a political conflict because some policymakers, politicians and the economists, they are in favor of economic progress through rapid and huge industrialization, massive industrialization. But in this method, there is high chance of polluting the environment, and pollution is the byproduct of such industrial process. And some economists, they are policymakers and also the politicians, they are much concerned about protecting the environment. So that creates a conflict between two ideologies, and that's always calls for the possibility of societal collapse. And if we see the history of civilizations, we can see, we observe that many civilizations, they were destroyed due to ecocide. Ecocide means damaging environment continuously. And the same concept was reflected in the Malthusian population theory. In Malthusian theory, he said that population grows at a faster rate or at geometric progress, whereas the natural resources and specifically the agricultural production increases at an arithmetic progress. So there will be crisis over time. There will be crisis in the economy, which could be solved by the natural disasters. Maybe man-made disaster like war, or maybe war, social conflict, or maybe due to the natural disaster like soil erosion, flood, earthquake, all these things. And the Club of Rome, as per their convention, this theory, the limits of growth, was propounded in the year 1972. And as per this theory, we can say that if the progress or the present growth trend is the world population, consequent industrialization, and whenever world population grows, the industrialization is there is also growing need for food. So food production and consequent depletion of natural resources. So if these things are continued within next 100 years, that means approximately 2072, there will be no further scope of growth. The growth will be limited. And from all the things, there arise three major questions. What are the questions? Number one, if we consider the developing nations, and what path should they follow? Should they follow the path like developed nations of extracting natural resources, rapid and massive industrialization, the depletion of natural resources, stock of natural resources? So should they follow it? Next thing is that currently we are going through, if we consider the current scenario, So in this current scenario, can we afford a path of development which includes which requires the depletion of renewable and non-renewable sources of energy? Is it possible for us now, or can we think of this? Is it desirable? Next thing is that the progress that damages environment, the economic progress that damages environment. So question is, can we take a path of economic progress which damages the environment? Should we take it? So this comes to the normative sense. What should we do right now? And now the major threats of industrialization, that from the industrial sector, there is continuous release of the greenhouse gases like lead oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. So all these things contribute to increasing the heat, increasing the temperature, which is known as global warming. So, and also in this process, the fertility of the land declines. So that's why you will find a decline in the production of food grains. And continuous deforestation for urbanization, that creates the crisis to the plants and animals. Some are getting endangered, continuously endangered, and there can be extinction of such plants and animals. And due to urbanization, due to overpopulation, and also the environmental damage, there are some increase in disease, different types of disease, and also the water stress due to water pollution. And also due to global warming, there is the melting of ice in the polar regions, for which the sea level increases, and that's why the people who live in the coastal zones or low-lying coastal zones, these places get waterlogged, and these people are being endangered. They become homeless. So millions of poor people, they become homeless due to this global warming. Not direct effect of global warming, but the melting of ice in the polar region, which increases the sea level, the water level of the sea, and waterlogging in the coastal zones, which is very dangerous. Now if we consider the relationship between economic growth and the environment, so it is basically a complex and the dynamic relationship. It changes with time. If we consider the Malthusian population theory, their one major loophole is that it ignored all type of technological progress. So whenever there is technological progress, it will not cause a problem in the food. It will not cause the problem of food crisis. No, because growth in food production, that will definitely be more than the rate of growth of population. But whenever we are considering the technological progress, there is the usage of renewable and non-renewable resources. So renewable resources like forest, and non-renewable resources like the fossil fuel extraction, or more extraction of the fossil fuel like coal, petroleum, etc. So such progress can somehow reduce the environmental impacts. So that's why it is very difficult, and sometimes we can see there is some technological progress for which there is the reduction in environmental damage also. So it is very difficult for us to reach any conclusion. It is very difficult to say whether the technological progress and growth will hamper the environment, or it will also that means reduce pollution and protect our environment. It is very difficult to say, find out any particular relationship between economic growth and the environmental effect. Now this is environmental Kuznets curves. So conventional environmental Kuznets curve says that initially with the increase in income per capita, the pollution increases, and here we see whenever it reaches $5,000 per capita income, after that there will start a decline in the pollution level. So initially growth and pollution are directly related, and after a certain level pollution is inversely related to the economic growth, specifically due to the technological progress. That means greener technology, maybe the introduction of the greener technology which will reduce the pollution. So in the first stage, what are the explanation? That first stage of industrialization, there is rapid population growth. So that's why there is more stress on environment. There is weak environmental regulation. So first time, whenever with the increase in economic growth, there is more environmental damage or more pollution. But whenever once the basic needs of income is being fulfilled, so that time there is more demand for cleaner environment. So that's why there is the emergence of effective regulatory institutions, greener technology to control the pollution. So again, next time whenever there is increase in the per capita income, there is decline in pollution also, because of the positive effects of economic growth on environment. So there are some criticisms of environmental Kuznets curve also. So Dasgupta says that if there is free trade and globalization, so there will be global competitiveness, so there will be sustained pollution, because if we want to make things globally competitive, we have to produce it at a lower cost. But if we consider of any technology, using any technology with production which will reduce the pollution, that will definitely increase the cost. So that as per Dasgupta, if we consider he says the new toxic path. So he said, as per Dasgupta, there should be sustained pollution. That means he does not agree with the environmental Kuznets curve that after reaching $5,000 per capita income, the economy will control pollution and reduce pollution. He thinks that pollution will remain sustained. It will not definitely increase, but it will remain sustained. Next thing is that there is another criticism which we call the new toxic path. New toxic path says what? That whenever income growth is there and there is again and again industrialization or consecutive new companies coming, so that will also create some new environmental hazards. So maybe the existing companies, they are controlling pollution, but whenever the new companies are coming, they will increase the pollution level. And there is another optimistic evidence that was again by Dasgupta. He says that the growth will be less polluting and reduction of pollution will start at the lower level of income. This concept is known as revised environmental Kuznets curve. Now, if we think from a different perspective, what we see that at the initial stage of growth, so there is the shift. We know as per the theory of the structural theory of development, it says that first time at the initial stage, there is more dependence on agriculture. So whenever the economy grows or it moves in the path of development, there is a shift from agriculture to industry. So agricultural production is, we can say it, a clean agrarian system from which we are moving towards a polluted industrialized system. The industrial production means more pollution. And as the economy, there is more economic progress, there will be shift from industry to the service sectors. The service sector is again, that is pollution free. So this is called the matured stage. In the matured stage, the country will shift from polluting, that means industries, to the service sector or the tertiary sector in which there is less pollution. And another thing is that whenever there is continuous increase in the per capita income level of the country, there will be more institutional development. That means the institutions will emerge to control the pollution. So there will be better public policies. Government will also adopt some policies to curb pollution, and also there will be the firms will also introduce some advanced clean technology. And sometimes this is a policy adopted by the highly developed countries. They do it that they sometimes through FDI or by some contract made with the developing countries. So there's the inputs, production of inputs for which the pollution level is high. They just use the developing nations to produce that production. They purchase it. So that is called the exporting the pollution intensive production. For example, any FDI, any large multinational corporations. So it produces some commodities for which the air pollution is the result, byproduct. So what they will do, they will shift their production units to the developing countries as foreign direct investment, a direct investment. So they are not polluting their own country, but they are polluting the developing nations. Now, question is whether the developing nations will be able to reduce pollution after a certain level as shown in the environmental Kuznets curves. But there is the high possibility that LDCs will follow either the race of the bottom or new toxic, because the economic structure of LDCs are different from the developed countries. It is very difficult for them to implement all the pollution control rules, because in reality it is very difficult to find out any particular relationship between growth and pollution. So that's why now we have to think of the new concept. There comes the new concept which we call sustainable development, because in LDCs you cannot find out any particular relationship between growth and pollution rate. The nature of the LDCs are much different from the economic nature of the developed nations. Now, what is the basic concept of sustainable development? The Brundtland Commission in 1987 introduced the concept that we should meet the need of present but without compromising the ability of future generation. So that means we should develop but not at the cost of the potential of future generations. But this concept is vague, because how can you define need, properly define need? What we mean to say about the need of present generation and the need of the future generation? And next thing is that similarly the lack of clarity. There is no clear instruction that how the need of the future generation will be fulfilled. And next thing is that there is how we will compare between the standard of the current generation and the future generation. If we want to compare the need may not be equally comparable considering the standard of two different generations. So that's why they introduced the new concept of sustainable development. Here it is clearly mentioned that the standard of well-being that should be either same or better than the current generation. So that means if we consider the intergenerational well-being, that should not decline, that should increase or at least remain same. And next thing is that we should not confine the sense of well-being or we should not confine the concept of well-being only into wealth. So well-being and wealth, that is a confining well-being into wealth, it is a very narrow sense. So we have to think well-being in a broader sense. So that's why there was the wider concept of wealth that was introduced by first Kenneth Arrow. So he concentrates on the economy's productive base. Productive base means mainly physical capital as well as human capital. And that's why the comprehensive wealth, there was the new concept of comprehensive wealth, which introduced both natural capital, produced capital, and the intangible capital. So intangible capital means human capital, social capital, and institutional capital. So human capital and social capital specifically means the efficiency of human being and society, and institutional capital means that strong working institutions that cater the need for the developing nations. So that's why there was another concept, that wider concept of GDP. Normally we see what GDP can increase with the decline in comprehensive capital stock. So for example, we say you have established the example of Chile and Zambia, for which the GDP increases, but due to extensive copper mining, there is a decline in the stock of copper. So that means the capital stock is declining though GDP is increasing. So that's why we have to introduce the wider concept of GDP. Now, what is the problem of the problems regarding the evaluation? First of all, the value is what? Value is the function of price determined in the market. But if we consider the environmental products, there is no proper market for environmental products in which the price can be determined by the interaction of demand and supply. So for example, if we consider the cost of damage in health, if pollution causes a damage in health, now how can we define the value of how can we determine the value of that cost to our health damage? What is the cost of our health damage? It is very difficult to determine. So, and also the cultural, aesthetic and recreational values. There is no proper measurement of such values. So, basically there is the problem of evaluation of regarding different types of damages and also different types of the natural capital, intangible capital. We cannot know, we don't know how to make the actual measurement or actual evaluation of it. Now let us consider, now we will consider the problems of the developing nations. We will discuss about the problems of developing nations. First of all, we see all the developing nations, they have huge stock of natural resources. But normally these people, the developing nations, still remain much dependent on natural capital compared to the other capital like manufactured capital or human capital. For example, if we take the case of Nigeria, the Nigeria economy is dominated by natural oil. So their resources come from extracting natural oil, mainly the fossil fuels. So the maximum part of the expenditure of that country is financed by the oil revenue. So Nigeria still remains underdeveloped because they could not take proper measure to transform the natural capital into manufacturing or intangible capital. That means they could, with the revenue earned from the natural capital, they could not properly industrialize. They could not properly form other industries. So that's why they remain underdeveloped, because their dependence is still on natural capital, specifically the oil reserve of that country. But the problem is that one day this oil reserve will completely depleted. Then what will be the way to finance its expenditures? So this is a major problem for Nigeria. Not only Nigeria, this type of problem remains for all the developing countries. And now we'll discuss the sustainability about Hartwig rule. So see here, the investment, he concentrates on the investment on produced capital. What are the produced capital? Like building, roads, knowledgeable stocks, all these things. So what we can do here, in one hand there is decline in the stock of natural resources, but with that rent, we can, from the rent that we earn from the non-renewable resources, we can invest it. Instead of consuming and spending it, we can invest it to make other productive capacity, so that we can earn from there. So here, as per Hartwig, there should be the developing countries should concentrate more on the construction of produced capital, more on the formation of produced capital. So that trade-off is very difficult, specifically for the countries which are dependent on renewable resources, because in case of non-renewable resources, there is huge threat that one day the stock will be depleted. But whenever we are considering the case of renewable resources, they can invest the rent on the renewable resources again. So in such cases, to control the over-exploration of renewable resources, we should ensure the property right and the institutions that support the property right. We have already studied about the Coase theorem, that if the environmental problem can be solved if property right is given to any of the parties. Okay, and main problem is the lack of market prices of such resources. For the environmental resources, it is very hard to find out any market price, because there is hardly any market for the environmental resources, and that's why there is the problem of the measuring the cost of damage or the value of environmental resources. So whenever we are assigning any property right, so it is very difficult to fix the tax or the reward for the whenever we are assigning property right to either of the parties. And if we see the less developed countries, the depletion of natural resources that can hamper the biodiversity. So if the biodiversity is endangered, the sustainability of the country or of the development is also endangered. Now we will see how to save for a sustainable future. So here we will concentrate more on the comprehensive wealth. What is comprehensive wealth? That is the current generation's well-being. So if we want to introduce a sustainable path of development, we have to remember that the well-being of the future generation will be at least equal to the current generation. It may be better, that's fine, but at least the standard of well-being of this generation must be maintained for the future generations. And second thing is that the rate of growth in wealth. So wealth means here comprehensive wealth. So rate of growth in comprehensive wealth must be at least equal to the rate of growth of population. So population growth rate must not exceed the rate of growth in comprehensive wealth. And we know that wealth is created through savings and investment. So if we want to increase our comprehensive wealth, to maintain the growth rate of our comprehensive wealth, we have to maintain our genuine saving or adjusted net saving. So adjusted net saving is a new concept introduced by the economists who plead for sustainable development, that is the gross national saving. We have to consider the gross national saving, and we have to consider the changes in the volumes of capital, in the volume of all forms of capital.